Hey guys, and welcome back to the channel. We've got another exciting stair installation video on this beautiful lake job. Here we're going to be going over how to install solid wood newels, handrails, and balusters with square mortise balusters. It'll be a good one. Stay tuned. I'm starting out here by installing the newel at the top of the rake using a Sure-Tight hanger bolt. These things are amazing. If you haven't seen my previous video on how to use Sure-Tight bolts to install solid wood newels, be sure to check that out. They are a must-have tool for your arsenal. Next, we're going to take a look at how to install a solid newel at the bottom of our rake run. You can see I'm basically splitting the newel in half and notching it around the riser. This is going to make it really strong and it just works out really well. The nosing on the stair tread itself will also terminate nicely into the side of my newel post, doing it this way by splitting it down the middle. So let's dig into it and see how this is done. Now the first thing is obviously to mark out on your newel how you want to cut it, where you want to cut it with some accurate pencil lines. But then the question is, how are we actually going to cut this big chunk of wood out of this solid newel? There's different ways you could go about this. I'm going to show you how I do it. The first thing I'm doing is I'm setting my miter saw depth stop to the depth that I want the blade to plunge down to, and I'm actually aiming to keep it just a hair higher than my actual cut line. I'll show you why in a minute. So if I need a 1 3/4 cut, I'm aiming for about a 1/16 of an inch less than that. You can see here there's this little black piece that flips down on your DeWalt miter saw. That is your depth stop. And then that little black bolt that is up there, you simply adjust that set screw in and out, and that will move the depth stop deeper or shallower according to whatever you want. Basically then we just make a whole bunch of plunge cuts through the newel post, and again, we're a little bit higher than the actual cut line we want here, but this is a great way to do this. I probably even put a little bit more cuts here than I would have needed to, but it works pretty good. Now we want to leave all these pieces in. Don't make the mistake of breaking them off. You need all of these pieces to stay on because they act as a guide as we move over to the table saw. And again, you'll notice my pencil line, those miter saw cuts are a hair higher than my actual pencil line. And that is because we're going to do our finish cut with the table saw. Now I'm actually making a mistake here. Well, actually, let me back up. Raise your blade all the way up and mark a line at the front of your blade so you know exactly where to stop your cut. And you'll see here as I get started, I'm actually orienting the post with my little cut pieces away from the fence. You don't want to do that. You want to make your first cut with those little pieces towards the fence because they're going to be stronger on the first cut and you can actually use them as a guide. I realized that as soon as I turned the table saw on, and I'm making the adjustment right now to make the proper cut first. Now we'll go ahead and flip the newel post over and move our blade over so that it is exactly where it needs to be. It's very important to be accurate when you do this because if you don't make your cut precisely, the newel post will not sit squarely. So take your time, do it right, pay attention to that mark where you need to stop the cut so you don't go too far. You'll notice all those little pieces fell out now. You got to watch those things. You don't want those to fall down into your dust collection area. It's a pain to get them out, and they can also turn into missiles pretty easily. We're then left with a really small area that needs a little chisel work. It's a piece of cake to get that all cleaned up with a nice sharp chisel. Now you'll see here that I've got the nosing on my stair tread notched out so that my notch newel post can slide in and be nice and tight against the riser. For some reason I forgot to turn the camera on to film that process, but I'll show you on the next section down to the basement what that looks like. This is also another reason to take care early in the process to make sure when you install your riser that it's nice and plumb, because whenever you bolt and screw this newel post in, it's going to pull tight to that riser, and if it's not plumb, your newel post is going to be not plumb also. Good stair work is all about good planning and thinking ahead. Getting that riser plumb and then having good blocking inside of that cavity will ensure that we can lag this solid newel post in nice and tight, and it'll basically auto plumb itself. I almost had an issue here because my newel posts were pre-ordered at a specific length, and that length was barely long enough to have what I needed in this situation. You'll see here I'm checking my newel height by laying my level across the tread nosings, and then we'll make a mark on the underside of that level on the front edge of the newel post, and you can measure up from that mark to where the top of your handrail should be to make sure that everything is good. Code is typically 34 to 38 inches from the angle of your rake across the nosing, that plane, to the top of your handrail. So here I'm checking that, and it's going to be all right, but I was a little bit close on this. You'll see here we're going to put raw engineered flooring on this landing so that it can be stained the same, and I've got the newel post up so that that flooring can slide right under it. When I fasten these newel posts, I start by marking my lag screw location. I pre-drill a 1/2 inch hole with a Forstner bit, and then I like to use GRK R4 screws, 5.5 inches long. They pull it really tight and they get in deep into my blocking that's inside of that cavity, and it makes it super strong. Now we're going to do the same thing on this newel post going down to the basement. Notice I'm holding it in the position where I think the newel post will need to stand, and then I'm going to go ahead and notch out the nosing on this tread. I didn't show you that on the previous one. You just want to have a sharp blade in your jigsaw. Be as careful and precise as possible so that whenever you slide that newel post in there, it's a perfect fit as much as possible. Notice on the back side of this cut, it does not need to be precise at all there because the newel post will overlap and cover that entire portion of the cut. Now we'll go ahead and cut our notch out of this solid newel here. We want to be as precise as possible again when laying this notch out, and using a combination square or a double square is a great way to do that. This ensures that you've got the exact same distance on both sides of the cut. There's a little bit of error possibility if you're just using a tape measure and pencil to do that. So then we're just carefully squaring everything across, and then I like to put a big squiggly line on the portion of the cut where I'm actually going to be cutting it out and removing material so I don't get confused. Another key thing I forgot to mention earlier is you need to have a 1x4 on the back side of this cut between your newel post and your fence. This is going to allow your blade to plunge at full depth the entire way through the cut. You'll also notice on this one, I did not run my cuts all the way to the bottom. I didn't need to because the table saw ends up cutting out all of that material at the bottom of the post anyways. So it's not necessary to make as many cuts as I did on the first one. A lot of time there's value in just kind of easing your cut in a little bit and testing it and seeing it how it aligns with your pencil marks before you completely send it. That way, if you need to make a minor adjustment, you still have time to do so. Again, you'll notice the way I'm starting this cut with my sliced up section towards the fence. That way there's good support the entire way through this cut. The blade on these table saws only goes up about 3 inches, I think. So it's not possible to actually go the entire way through a 3.5-inch thick solid newel. Here's a little better angle on how we finish up the cut at the top of our cutout. You see there's just a small triangle of material left at the top for us to remove. It's really easy to do so with the chisel. I'm basically just making a score line across the top of the cut here, and then we'll flatten out the chisel and remove the rest of that meat. Here's a closer look at our fit between our newel post and tread nosing and riser. Everything is looking really good. You'll notice that back cut that I cut out in the back, how ugly that is. It doesn't matter because it's getting covered up, and actually having it back cut a little bit gives you a place to put some PL premium adhesive, so that you'll get a little bit better bond right there. Now, my philosophy on setting newel posts is I love mechanical fasteners, but I love liquid fasteners even more in a lot of cases. I like to use them both, so we're using some really long 5.5-inch GRK lag screws here, as well as PL premium, and that is going to give a huge amount of lateral stability to this newel post. Because we're tying the newel post into the riser as well, the two are going to become one, and it is going to be absolutely rock solid for a long time. I've got my handrails cut already, and we're going to move over to baluster layout here. So I've got my baluster calculator app out. I've shown this before. I like to put a piece of tan tape down on my white oak shoe rail, and then I'll use a combination square to mark the center line. The great thing about the app is that it gives me a running total of my measurements, so I can just start on one end and mark the centers of all of my balusters using the app. Once I get my shoe rail marked out, I'll go ahead and mark my handrail also. Now on the larger balcony section, I actually did the mortises on my shoe rail before I permanently fastened it down. For this short section, I was just trying to keep things moving, so I'm going to hand mortise those square mortises here with a chisel. Since there's just a handful of them, it'll go pretty quick, but on a larger balcony, I like to use my mortiser for that. We'll go ahead and use a 1/2-inch Forstner bit on my center line to drill a hole, try and make it the exact same depth on all of them. And then I use a square chisel mortiser bit, I guess you would call it, to hammer out these square chisels. You want to use a square to keep it aligned square. It's a little bit tricky. You got to take your time doing this, but it goes pretty quick overall. Here you'll see at normal speed, I'm using the square to help me align the chisel. And what I do is I look down all 4 sides of the chisel and ensure that it is centered. Usually you have to adjust it just a hair. If you don't take your time here, the square portion won't be perfectly centered on your round hole, and you'll see that, and you won't have a perfectly round or a perfectly square mortise after you're done. And here we are, everything looks really good. I like to use the tan tape here because it's easy to see the pencil line, and then whenever you pull it off, you don't have to worry about sanding off pencil lines later. To do our mortises on our handrail, we'll use the actual mortiser here. Just goes a lot faster. So this is a really hard machine to find. There's a few different manufacturers have made it, and I don't think it's patented, so these different companies keep making it and it gets rebranded all the time. It's really hard to find. I actually had to have this one imported from Canada. So if you want one of these, I really don't know where to tell you to look even, but they're out there. They're just really hard to come by. You can see this doesn't do a perfect job, but it does a pretty darn good job, and it's really fast. I'm sure if I tuned it a little bit better and had a perfect chisel and sharp bit, it might do a little bit better job. Next, we need to cut a bunch of balusters all at the same length. and we need to figure out what that length needs to be. To do that, I'll take a scrap of baluster and I'll drive it all the way into my mortise and mark the bottom of it with a pencil line. Do this in a few different mortises so you get kind of an average depth, and we'll do the same thing in the shoe rail. We'll measure from the shoe rail to the bottom of the handrail, and then we'll add the depth of those mortises to that measurement, and that tells me how long I need to cut all of my balusters. So I'll take that measurement and I'll take probably 1/8 of an inch off of it to give me the perfect length. Here you can see the pencil lines from the depth of my mortises. So I'll measure each of those individually and add that to my measurement from the top of the shoe rail to the bottom of the handrail. When it comes to large stair jobs, you really can't beat this metal cutting DeWalt saw. It's got a metal cutting blade on it and then this jig. Super handy, allows me to batch cut these balusters to the exact same length extremely quickly, and it just works well. So I usually just plop it down on the floor. As you can see, we've cut a lot of balusters on this job, and it works great. Just make sure you always wear eye protection. Inevitably, if you don't, you're going to get one of them little pieces of metal in your eye and you're going to have to go to the eye doctor. Don't ask me how I know. One key tip that I can give you that you do not want to find out the hard way is that you do not want your balusters to rattle. And whenever you hand mortise these square mortises, they're a lot looser than the actual mortiser is, and they could potentially rattle and make noise as people run up and down the stairs and whatnot, and you don't want that. So putting a little bit of this E6100 adhesive in each mortise ensures that you're not going to have a rattle. It only takes a little bit of time. I like this adhesive because it's very thick, and you can kind of just plop it in there and you don't have to worry about it falling out from the underside of a handrail. Now we'll go ahead and install our balusters. You want to use a rubber mallet with the, for me it's the yellow head on it, which is pretty firm, but it's not going to mar the balusters. And make sure that you've got that little hole on the end of the balusters pointed up, because for me, the mortise on my handrail is deep enough that I can hide that little hole. And that is really important. So make sure that you pay attention to that. Just start at one end, drop the handrail into place, kind of work it in, and it goes pretty quick on these flat runs. It's pretty easy because everything mortise wise and length of baluster wise should be exactly the same length. It's a little bit harder to do this on a rake, but you know, you get the picture. Here I'm just putting my wood plugs in just to get this section of rail done, and then we can move on down to this rake section. For some reason I didn't take video of this, but we want to do the layout on our treads the same way. I like to use the tan tape, mark the centers with a pencil, and then I didn't show laser plumbing our marks up and marking the underside of the handrail, which is important. But I did that already, and I'm drilling all the holes, and then I'm going through and hand mortising the square mortises on our treads also. Takes a little bit of time, but that is just part of it. Whenever people want this square mortise look without baluster shoes, it's a premium price for a premium job. Takes more time to do this, but it's worth it in the end. It yields a really clean, crisp look once everything's all done. Now we move on to removing our handrail so that we can mortise it. I've just got this tacked in place with some GRK screws. Again, I drill a 1/2 inch hole with a Forstner bit and then use GRK screws to fasten the handrail. We're moving over to the mortiser, getting it set at the angle to match the stair. I use a digital angle gauge to do this. Works extremely well because it magnetically holds onto the chisel. So I'll match that up, bolt it down in the back, and then go to town. It is a little bit of a struggle mortising this white oak. Because it is so hard, you really have to push down hard on the handle a lot of times. And for some reason, this machine, the head can actually spin a little bit. So you have to watch that it doesn't move over time. Having a good sharp chisel and drill bit really helps with this. So take care of your stuff as much as possible. You don't want to attempt this on a white oak handrail with a dull chisel and bit. I didn't take a video of me measuring the balusters, but I essentially go and tack that handrail back into place, then I measure all of my baluster lengths. If your stair is built properly, the front, middle, and rear baluster will be the same length on every tread. That doesn't always happen, in which case I'll usually take the smallest of all of the average measurements and use that. That way I can just batch cut these all at the same length. Again, we do not want our balusters to rattle, so I am adding some E6100 adhesive to all of these mortises and the handrail as well, just to ensure we don't have rattle. Use the rubber mallet, pound all these babies in, and hope that you didn't screw up any of the lengths. It really stinks whenever you realize you cut 1 inch too short or too long, which is again a wonderful reason to use a jig and batch cut, because that's going to give you a much better chance of having them all correct versus if you're measuring and cutting each one by hand with a tape measure and pencil. Would you look at that? Everything fit like it was supposed to. So then I go down and I permanently fasten the bottom of the rail, the top of the rail, and I'll use my level to make sure that the rail is straight. Time to go ahead and do the exact same thing on the basement rake section. You can see here, I've got my mortiser, I've got my handrail, and it's just a matter of rinse, repeat, keeping an eye on that mortiser head to make sure that it's not twisting on me again. Whenever that does twist, it moves your mortise off center. Don't ask me how I know that, found that out the hard way, so it's something you definitely have to keep an eye on. Cutting the balusters, I'll start with the shortest section, cut all of those, and then I'll move my stop on my jig over, cut the middle section, cut all of those, and then move the stop over on my jig for the longest section and cut all of those. And it's just robotic, which is what you want in carpentry, and it works really well. Taking the handrail down again, plopping my E6100 in all those holes, and we start pounding in those balusters. Again, I'm also watching that hole that's in the top of the baluster from the powder coating and making sure that it is oriented correctly so that it will be hidden. I like to leave that end uncut because it's a little bit duller edge on it, so it doesn't scratch up the bottom of the handrail nearly as much as if you have a cut end on it. Same thing again, we'll permanently fasten the bottom and top of the handrail, put a level on it, make sure the rail is straight, and Bob's your uncle, we've got a beautiful staircase. So always very satisfying to see this come together with these square mortises. Again, leave the plastic on those, that way the painters have less to mask off. The painters do have to mask around these whenever you do this style of baluster install, because everything has to be installed at one time. You can't put your balusters in after the fact. So thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed this one. The house turned out beautifully, and as you can see here from these video clips, I am getting ready to hand it over to the painters. Can't wait to see it all finished up. It's going to be great. Square mortise balusters just add an extra layer of crispness to a trim package. It is definitely worth the extra effort.